Today we're discussing the topic resource diplomacy, and with particular focus on the Middle East and on water resources. So welcome to our debate. It's good to see you. We have two excellent speakers who are going to expand on the topic, and I will introduce them in a second. So we organize these debates once a month in the context of the International Forum on Diplomatic Training. And for us, they offer a space to discuss key topics in diplomatic practice. My name is Katharina Höhne. I'm a senior researcher with DiploFoundation, and I will be your moderator for today. So in this function, let me give you a very brief introduction to what we mean by resource diplomacy. So I think it's important to keep in mind it's a question for both bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. It is often linked to the management of natural resources, trade, investment, and development cooperation. So if we understand diplomacy in its kind of traditional definition, diplomacy as the management of international relations, then resource diplomacy becomes a question around the acquisition of resources and the joint management of these resources. One thing people often think about when we talk about resource diplomacy are non-renewable resources, which have a huge economic impact, oil and gas, rare earths. And in these cases, diplomacy becomes about pursuing resources abroad, about bargaining around oil and gas prices, for example. One thing we often hear is the evolving political and economic role of of China in Africa, and the link between aid, trade, and geopolitical competition. But we also have another kind of side to resource diplomacy, where it's about shared resources, such as water and air. And here questions that become important are, how are these resources shared? Does use by one party impact or preclude the use by others? How do these resources enter diplomatic negotiations? Are they used as a bargaining chip? And then also we have a lot of questions around sustainability. So as I said, today we focus on water resources in the Middle East, but also obviously we try to kind of find lessons and key points for other regions and other kind of contexts and situations. And I'm really happy to say that both our speakers are uniquely positioned to speak on this topic. So let me very briefly introduce both of them. We have Lotien de Boer, who is a senior advisor on environmental policy, urban planning, and water for the Dutch regional government. She is currently working with the Regional Water Board on the implementation of the Dutch National Climate Adaptation Strategy. And Lotien did quite a lot of research on diplomacy of water in the Middle East. And then we have Nadav Tal, who is a hydrologist by training, and he currently serves as the water officer and Jordan Valley field coordinator for an organization called EcoPeace. And EcoPeace is an organization working in the Middle East that brings together Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli environmentalists. Before I hand over to our speakers, let me issue a very quick reminder that we're trying to make this debate as interactive as possible. So while our two speakers will give us a very brief introduction into the topic in a second, I would like to encourage you to already think of your questions, your comments that you want to raise with them. And you can put the questions and comments in the chat window, and I will have a look at the comments and questions, kind of summarize them, and then bring them back to our speakers. So having said all that, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Lotien first for her quick introduction, and she will gonna get obviously a lot more deeper into the topic, so I'm really looking forward to that. So Lotien, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katharina. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I serve at the moment as a program director of climate adaptation, and as you say, for the regional government north of Amsterdam, where we are very busy implementing national policy because, as you might know, the Netherlands is a low-lying country. Our territory is more than 50% or 50% below sea level. I live 5 meters below sea level. Our major cities, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, are all in the west, our major industries. So the Netherlands has had to work together on all levels, governmental, political, civil society, be very cooperative in a non-hierarchical way If we don't work together, then we are not able to stay in this particular part of the country. So this has gone on for hundreds of years, and I've been looking at how we can maybe apply this successful cooperative strategy to the Middle East, which is a totally different dynamic. We have excess water here, but of course, in the Middle East it's arid, and there's a deficiency. So looking at water as a source of conflict, how do I get to the? Oh, there you go. Did I do that? Look at water as a source of conflict, and of course climate change will only increase tensions, especially in vulnerable areas in the Middle East, for example. It's very important to find and devise new strategies, new ways of collaboration to reach peaceful coexistence around shared water. Maybe somebody can do the oh, no, there you go. Yeah. So this is what we look at today, the mountain aquifer in this area, which is very important to all inhabitants in the region. For the Israeli side, the Palestinian side, and the Jordanian side, important dependent on this area. And it's also a good example on how you are politically and linked to each other because of this aquifer. So what I'm going to do today with you, I'm going to share a lot of text with you, and this is something I normally don't do, but I would like to offer you this presentation after this web debate, so you can use it as a checklist for wherever you are in the world. If you're in the Middle East, or you're in Europe, or you're somewhere else in Africa, you can use this presentation as a checklist to prepare for your own proposal, maybe a draft treaty or an agreement, to see if you're actually working towards a successful strategy in water management or any other resource management, really. So just to look at an overview on how water resources may serve as a root of conflict. Of course, control of water in itself can serve as a root of conflict if one state is acting as a basin bully, as we call it. Water resources or water systems can be used as a military tool, and also used as targets or tools of violence, of coercion, and this is of course in the case of terrorism. And they can be used as targets for military actions, and these points are very much part of maybe everyday warfare, but it can also be subtle, it can also be subliminal, and that's more when you have a party in a water shared resources system that maybe withholds a supply from another party to this area. That would actually impede their economic and social development, and that's of course just as detrimental. Before you start working on your agreement, your draft, your treaty, your proposal, it's good to take a step back and actually think about what makes up good cooperation. It's very important to make a definition of what cooperation is, what it means to you and to your partners. And it's also essential to understand the goals of all co-riparians. And of course, riparian is those who possess or own land along the body of water. Cooperation at a community level, I suggest that, and always to start at community level, because you can learn from a smaller process, which you can then turn into a municipal level, maybe even regional, national, and international. But start small is my suggestion, and it's also what Dr. Jägerskog from the Water Institute proposes. So it's also important to understand that the opportunities for each basin, wherever in the world, is unique and abundant and endless, and there is a range of developments available. So when a state understands that net economic and political benefits outweigh unilateral action, they might be persuaded to cooperate. And the more you broaden the benefits, the basket of benefits, the available win-win solutions, the more you will achieve, I believe, effective water cooperation. So when will states cooperate? When they understand that they can reduce common water-related risks. A big problem to cooperation, for successful cooperation, is economic inequity and power asymmetry. Those are important barriers, and this is also where the international community comes in. Third parties can step in and help a weaker state with capacity building and also objective standards which parties can hold each other accountable to. And this way you can address inequity, increase equity in transboundary water management. So long-term flexible support from third parties encourage effective cooperation. How do you do this? Before you do anything, please analyze your own state, your own government, but also your partner's circumstances. And you can use analysis for that, for example, the barrier analysis. You can analyze whether, for example, you have to deal with inequality between riparian states. For example, if you deal with a richer state versus a poorer state, a major difference in political systems, for example, authoritarian versus democratic. If there is one state that has a much stronger geopolitical influence in the basin, if there is a difference in religious view and ethnic composition, if there is a difference in legal system, if there is a difference in access to investment markets, if one state has much more access to money, subsidies, and so forth. Of course, the West Bank is an example, sadly, of where there is civil strife within the basin. And also important is the in-country infrastructure, if there's a difference there. If you don't have a regional institution in place, for example, in the Netherlands, we work a lot with regional water boards. If you don't have that and you don't have that framework, that will impede cooperation. And of course, on more on the physical side, if you have a closed basin with limited water resources, where there's no inputs from outside sources, that will put constraints on water quality. So limited in-country capacity and all the things I mentioned before will possibly impede effective regional cooperation. So what do you do then? You need to devise all win-win solutions you can possibly find for that particular situation, that particular basin. For example, hydropower. If you have a situation where you cannot totally avoid power asymmetry, where a weaker state will stay a weaker state, then it's maybe an idea to throw hydroelectric power into the mix and maybe allocate certain benefits from the basket of benefits more to a state that cannot access all of the water supply that it maybe needs. I would love to hear later on in the web debate what you think for your area, maybe for this area, you use as an approach to deal with the barriers that I mentioned before, and if you can also think of possible benefits in addition to the ones that I will mention. For example, you have the primary production, agriculture, industrial is something you can divide in a more equitable way. Urban growth, industrial development, and also, for example, in addition to environmental and ecosystem services, more and more important, the way you can adapt to climate change, because this will be a major issue in the coming years everywhere. So this is my theoretical story. I will now hand you over to Mr. Tal, who will show us how this theory may apply in practice in the area.
Okay. Thank you, Lutine, for this interesting presentation. Actually, my presentation will continue from where you ended. Actually, I'm talking to you today from Israel, from the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley is a very special, unique area because it functions also as a border between Israel and Jordan, and also between the West Bank and Jordan. I live below sea level. It's about minus 100 meters below sea level, and it's a very hot region. Today we have 33 degrees here, which is really hot for November, and I guess it's part of the climate change that we all are facing around the world, and I will also talk about it in the presentation. We are suffer from climate change very much, and the Middle East, with all the droughts that we face, eventually we can face disaster. I will start my presentation about introducing my organization. I work as a water officer in EcoPeace Middle East. Actually, we're the only regional organization between Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians that's working together for saving our shared environmental resources. So we are very focused on water diplomacy and cooperation over water under an area that is in conflict for many, many years. And we think that we should separate the issues that separate us, or the political issues that have a lot of disagreements, into the civilian issues, mainly resources and focusing on water. How can water be a bridge to peace, actually? So I will start my presentation with actually, what is water security? When we're talking about water in the Middle East, it means that we need water security for everybody. The water management has a lot of parameters in it. We want drinking water and human well-being for everyone, but we want also water for the nature, for the ecosystem. We want to know how to treat water-related hazards and how can we mitigate climate change. And also water that relates to the economic activities like tourism, transport, energy, whatever we need the water for. And to manage all of that, we need trans-boundary cooperation. It's like we cannot have a solo player in this game. Yeah, we have to have a cooperation between all parties. We need also finance. Somebody to fund this water management, which can be expensive, especially if we want to mitigate to climate change and drought years. Peace and political stability is a must. So if we're going to have a war or a conflict in the region, so it will be much harder to cooperate over these issues. And of course, good governance. Good governance, it means like if water is being supplied for free, is not good governance. Or pricing water and measuring water is a key aspect in order to reach water security, which is in some countries very basic, but in our region there is a lot to be done in that matter. Water security around the world, you can see in this picture about all the countries that are colored with red and maybe orange, that it's a problem in many, many countries, but it's really a problem in the Middle East and North Africa. Actually, the area that climate change is influenced the most, because every change in precipitation, which we suffered a lot from drought years. In the last 5 years, there was not a lot of rain in the region, and we live in a desert area. So the water resources are really under scarcity, and we have to reach a regional cooperation, because if we don't supply the water to our neighbors, or let's say Jordan will suffer a lot from water shortage, it can easily reach political instability, and we have a lot of examples like this, mainly in Syria, that some say that war in Syria started because of the water shortage and immigration of farmers from rural areas to the cities because of these water problems. So the regional challenges, I started to tell you about how water is scarce in the region, is like the most in the world. Climate change that influence this region the most. Population growth that is not really controlled here, and immigration from countries under conflict, like Jordan is an example how refugees from Syria flooded the country and which even harder the pressure on the water resources, and of course political instability that a lot of countries suffers from this in the last few years. We have also in the national level, each country have unsustainable water management. Regarding, for example, Israel, which had unsustainable water management for many years, but not in the recent years, during the 70s, 80s, and with good management and reform, we reached to be like a water superpower in the region. Israel is very efficient in its water management, and we in EcoPay think that with regional cooperation we can give the know-how and the knowledge to the other countries around us. On the regional level, we suffer from lack of trans-body water management, also mainly because of political issues. And also in the international level, we suffer from lack of comprehensive multi-sectoral approach to the regional water security. So how do we know that we have faced a problem? We based on several reports from the World Bank, the European Union, United Nations, all published a lot of reports about how climate change have influenced the region and how much problem we're going to face if we do nothing. So we can focus on major rivers basins around the world. We know the Nile Basin, which is the largest river in the world. They have 11 states that shared the Nile River from Ethiopia all the way to Egypt. And we know there is a problem there, that the people who control the source of the river dams the river and use the water, and Egypt lives from this water. So there must be a cooperation and management of this great river in order to supply water for everyone. And we know that even during these days there is still a lot of tension between Ethiopia and Egypt regarding this. The Jordan Basin, which is my basin, you know, where I live in, area under conflict. Actually, what the countries around the Jordan River did to the river is a disaster, because during the years the fresh water was diverted from the river, from the Sea of Galilee, that was diverted with the national water carrier to the south. The Syrians have part of the Yarmouk River, which is a big tributary of the Jordan River, and of course Jordan all diverted the water, and actually the Jordan River, which is very famous around the world, is today almost like a sewage canal. We did a master plan, EcoPeace, a regional master plan, in order to rehabilitate the river and do economical development in the area. And of course we have the Tigris and Euphrates bases, which are in Iraq and in Turkey and Syria, which also suffer from a lot of pollution and unmanagement of the basin. Wait a sec, I'm trying to, okay, wait, bear with me, okay, now. You can see here by the arrow, I live here, yeah, that's Israel. I live right here, and the Jordan River starts from the Sea of Galilee all the way to the Dead Sea, unlike the Nile Basin, which is very, very, very large, you know, hundreds of miles, and the rivers in the Fertile Crescent in Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, all cross-border. We are humble and we want to focus on this area, the Jordan Valley, which is shared by Israel, Jordan, and Palestine. So actually the river is diverted from the Sea of Galilee here and from the Yarmouk River here, and we think that with more regional cooperation we can rehabilitate the river and release more fresh water to the river and also supply the water to the region. Okay. So some hotspots, you know, the Syrian civil war. We not really get deep into it. As I said before, it created a lot of pressure to Jordan water resources, and Jordan facing with climate change and this problem, a lot of pressure on the water resources. I'm going to skip this example a little bit to be focused on our region. So we have problem in the West Bank and Gaza. Okay, regarding the West Bank, we have we had an agreement with Palestine, Israel, and the Palestinian Authority during Oslo II Accords in the 90s. But because this process collapsed and there was no continues to the negotiation, we have the same agreement as we had during the 90s, and it's not enough water. It needs to be updated. The Palestinians get the fresh water from the amount they were agreed on the Oslo II. Israel is sending more water than Israel on this issue. Water is a major conflict between Israel and the Palestinians because there is still a dispute about how sharing the natural water resources, as Lutin showed in the mountain aquifer. In Gaza, it's a different example about how water management caused to the destruction of the coastal aquifer. Over extraction of the coastal aquifer caused 96.4% of the fresh water. No fresh water in Gaza. The water is being desalination, private desalination plants, very expensive. Israel is giving water to Gaza, but the capacity is not enough. So there are plans to build desalination plant on the coast, but still, until we don't reach an agreement, a political agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, the problem is far of being solved. Wait, I will just turn this off. Okay. So what happens if we don't cooperate on water, and so we can reach humanitarian crisis like Gaza is almost having because of lack of supply of water, lack of treating the sewage. Actually, the sewage that flows in Gaza eventually ends up in the Mediterranean Sea and flows north to the Israeli coast. So it's not only Palestinian problem in Gaza, it's also Israel interest to solve this problem with the sewage, because it can bring diseases, and diseases doesn't know any border, and it's more dangerous than any rocket or missile that is being shot from Gaza, because if we face a breakout of cholera disease in Gaza, it will influence Israel immediately. So Israel has all its interest to put an effort to put an end to this humanitarian crisis. All these issues can eventually end up in violence and conflict and regional instability. If we see Jordan, for example, who shares the longest border with Israel, Israel has all of its interests, though we have peace with Jordan, that Jordan will still be a stable country and not will have political unrest, because political unrest in Jordan means also dangerous and non-security for Israel from the west. So the key thing that we want to reach from competition on the source of water to cooperation. Cooperation over water resources could help to to tackle common problem, like I explained in Gaza, and to build relations like Israel did with Jordan during the peace treaty. Yes, in the peace treaty with Jordan, we agreed about water swaps between the two countries, and it strengthens the relations, the diplomatic relations, and we can take this source of water in order to build peace in the region. Some ideas that we propose, the Jordan Valley, as I mentioned before, master plan to take this very unstable area of the, I'm talking unstable regarding the environment, yes, that the Jordan River is destroyed, and take to a regional master plan involving the international community to rehabilitate the river. We have a program that says water cannot wait. It means that we cannot wait for peace in order to solve the water issues. So let's deal with water first. Let's reach a regional agreement between the parties only on water. Let's leave the other areas that separate us, the political issues, aside, and we can agree on the water. It's relatively easy to do it today because Israel is a superpower of water. We have desalination plants, 5 big desalination plants on the coast that desalinate the water and supply artificial water, actually. So actually the water resource is not a zero-sum game anymore. You know, it's not a competition. Israel can help the neighbors to supply more water, and we always need to remember that a thirsty neighbor will never be a good neighbor. So this is one thing. Water energy nexus. You know, you can think about what the advantage of each country. If Jordan, for example, have a lot of territory in area, and it's a desert country, we can maybe take advantage of the solar energy and renewable energy from Jordan for water from Israel. So we are want to create a healthy interdependency between the two countries, that Israel will supply the water, Jordan will supply the energy, and everybody benefits. So it creates political stability. And finally, we have a project called Good Water Neighbors. It means that we are working with communities around water resources to work together on their shared problems. So we bring the people together, Palestinians, the Israelis, Jordanians, that live under the same watershed, and we do a community work, mainly in education. So I want to skip a little because I don't have, okay, this is the final presentation, okay. So the regional water security needs, okay, what we need, it's facility exchange of knowledge and good practices in order to help developing effective water policies at the national level, so management, foster exchange of know-how and technology between the countries, develop and improve mechanism of trans-body water management at a sub-regional level, create a regional platform that would help identify and develop regional projects that would bring shared benefits to all parties. An example is a wastewater treatment plant that everybody can help to build, and mainly on cross-border basins. For example, if you know the city of Hebron in the West Bank, which suffered a lot of pollution, and all its sewage goes to the Hebron River and ends up in Israel. So Israeli suffers a lot from pollution from the West Bank. So it's under Israel interest to cooperate with the Palestinians to have this wastewater treatment plant that will take away the sewage. And eventually incentivize the functional and political spillover to other sectors within the region. And some people are making fun of us that say it's all a dream, you know, because we're living in a very hard area and conflict. But we always give the example of the Second World War in Europe, which was actually places that control Europe, and eventually through cooperation over steel, and they reached an agreement about stability in the region. Yes, Thank you very much. And if you want to know more, you can log into our website, ecopeaceme.org, and learn about how we do environmental peace building.
So thank you to both of you for giving us actually a very good overview. Lutin for giving us almost like a checklist on the kind of things we should focus on. Nadav for taking us deeper into the issues around water resources in the Middle East. We have quite a number of questions. I want to start with a question by Ginger Park and kind of connect it to a couple of other things that have been going on in my mind while I was listening to you. One question is, of course, how do we separate, in a sense, political conflicts from resource conflicts? I think this is something that came a little bit up in your presentation, Nadav. Can we separate that, or how do we create a more positive interplay between the two? And then Ginger's question kind of brings a second element, which is a legal question. So she's asking, is there a legal component to water management, such as water rights? So she's basically saying, is this all based on cooperation treaties, or are there any rights that are kind of already established? So for example, who has the right to water, and what happens in case of misuse? Is there any larger legal framework that is relevant here? So I think this would be an excellent starting point for us. This kind of, when we talk about resource diplomacy, we're obviously talking about, in our case, water shared resources and how to manage them. But then there are political questions that come into this, and also legal questions. So I think what I would like to ask you is to reflect a bit more on this kind of very difficult interplay in your context. Nadav, is it okay if we start with you and then hand over to Lutin from
So,
so go ahead.
Yes, and it has a lot of history. Even after 1948, where Israel was established, and during the 50s, there's a lot of tries from the U.S. government. It was Secretary of State, I don't forget his name, but he had an envoy only for water in the Middle East. His name was Johnston, that tried to reach an agreement between the countries, and did not succeed eventually. The main thing, first of all, we need the political will in order to reach water, cooperation on water. But before that, we need to understand the national interest of each side. If the national interest for Israel, for example, is to supply water to Jordanians, because Israel knows that if it will not do that, Jordan can face a problem and it will reach insecurity and political instability. It can face Israel immediately. So it's Israel's interest to supply water to Jordan. So this is how we reach cooperation on this resource. We need mutual interest. With the Palestinians, the case is a little different, because there's still a dispute on the freshwater resources. Yes, Israel is still supplying the Palestinians desalinated water, but it sells it. It sells it to the Palestinians, and the Palestinians want their own water. But still, Israel understands that having water security in Palestine, that's Israel's interest, because if they will not have water, they, as I said, thirsty neighbor will not be a good neighbor. So Israel supply water to Gaza. Israel supply water to the West Bank. The dispute is on the fresh water, on the management of the fresh water. And there is a big issue about this, because if, for example, in Gaza, the Palestinians control the fresh water, and eventually the aquifer was destroyed. Yes, they extracted the water, and it went silent because of the interface, or the water interface that came from the Mediterranean. So it's very complicated, but the major issue, we need to map the interest of each country, and eventually we will see that only through regional cooperation we can manage this resource correctly.
Over to you, Lutin. Do you have any answer to these kind of very complicated set of questions?
It is complicated, and it also depends, I think, where you are. As I started with the Dutch situation, we kind of separated political management of water resources from resource management by actually instating a separate water board. So what is important is that, for example, water issues, water management does not have to compete with other issues in the political arena. So we try to separate that because it's so important for the survival of the Dutch state, really, that you have to separate those. And for example, I just want to make a totally different area of the world. I think, please, I'd like to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think there's a really well-working treaty between India and Pakistan, and it's one of the few treaties that are actually working really well, and it's the Indus Water Treaty, which is negotiated by engineers and not so much by politicians. So my belief is if you separate it, you can focus more on the technical side of it and not have other issues compete with it. So that's why I would actually advocate for a separation of the two, although you can never totally separate it, obviously. There has to be a political will, like Nadav said. And yeah, it's better to have it separated from other issues. That's what I would say, especially if it's necessary for your survival. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's a lot to pick up on here. What I find interesting is this idea that eventually cooperation is in the interest of everyone involved, and I think Nadav made a really good case for this on the example of the Middle East, so that cooperation is in the self-interest to a certain extent, and then kind of finding this common ground and creating these kind of win-win solutions. What I also pick up on, and this is really interesting, is that obviously political issues cannot be completely separated from resource issues, resource management issues. But for example, to create a separate board, as Lotine mentioned, or to kind of look towards technical solutions on the ground which can move things forward even in the absence of a political agreement.
Right.
And this brings me to a question that came up as well from Pavlina, which kind of focuses on technological solutions. So at Diplo, we're looking a lot at new technology, sometimes talking about big data, AI, blockchain, and, for example, blockchain is one of the areas where people think there is a lot of scope for monitoring that can help lessen conflict situations. So her concrete question is, are there any digital technologies used in water management that you're aware of in this region or in a broader kind of context? To what extent? And then how does it impact the cooperation between these countries? And maybe that question is too specific, but generally speaking, if we can generalize from that, do you feel like there are technological solutions which might help quite a bit in lessening, for example, conflict around shared water resources or around shared resources, or in promoting cooperation even further? Are you aware of any examples, or do you have any general kind of thoughts on this issue? Shall we go in the same order again? So handing over to Nadav first and then Lotine.
Yes, actually the technology today have a key role in solving this problem, because we know we don't have enough fresh water. We have climate change, we have droughts, and we need the water, not only for drinking, but also for agriculture. It's a lot of water. In order to reach not only water security, also food security, we need to create artificial water actually, and for that we need technology. So we have desalination plants that Israel has the biggest desalination plant in the world. Wastewater treatment reuse. Yes, Israel is recycling 86% of the domestic wastewater. We have very sophisticated irrigation techniques like drip irrigation. All technologies that aim, and the objective is to save water. So we need to take that and bring it to the world and have everybody using it. And as I said before, because of desalination, Israel has more ability to help the neighbors, like Jordan and Palestine, through this technology, actually.
Routine, any thoughts on this quite tricky but also super interesting?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. Yeah. Well, just from my experience in the Netherlands, the regional water board here and the province, we have separate different bodies here that concern themselves with climate adaptation, water management. Regional water boards being the most important one. What they do is they invest a lot in big data and offering data and the map layers open source to the region, to the municipalities, to civil society really. Anybody can use that and also integrate whatever data is available into other areas of management. So we try to really integrate all these areas into one approach. So you have an really integral management. And this is also very much part of the Dutch national policy. So we're implementing a law in a couple of years that will integrate all data, all different areas of management for the whole area of the Netherlands in one go. So that is really up to digital innovation. And that's also difficult sometimes for people like me who are not very, I'm more of a policy person. So for me to extract the data that I need from that set is yeah, challenging, but also very interesting and will open new areas of expertise. I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Tal can tell us, are you also sharing your data open source, your maps and all of that? Is that something is shared with all partners in the region, or is that something that is?
The data is available online and it's accessible to everyone, so
Right.
it's really easy.
Right. Right.
Okay, then let me kind of move again to a different kind of sort of questions, different area of focus, and I'm going to be talking about rivers that flow through various countries, a sea border that is shared, etc., etc. There's an interesting comment that comes from Alberto Carmona, who says the case of the Nile Basin, there's only one country involved. So I'd like to hear your reflections on that. Can we actually separate these things? To what extent are there spillovers, even though the case for area of interests, basically the question of climate change, and if you can reflect on to what extent you expect conflicts around water resources to be exacerbated in the future due to the effect of climate change. And I think Nadav, you shared this beautiful map around the world where we could see the kind of areas where water resources are already scarce and where we expect more impact, more problems to change, for example. And this comes kind of in a dangerous comment about the fires that, so she's from the US, and right now there's a huge issue around fires, especially in California, around drought. And so it's very palatable, the kind of problems that are exacerbated. So if you can reflect on these two things before we start to wrap up, that would be really good. Let's go same order again. So Nadav and then Lutin. I'm really interested to hear your reflections.
Yeah, actually, climate change doesn't get the right attention here in Israel, and that's a shame. We are environmental organizations that we try to raise the awareness here. but because every drop counts here. So when we have hotter weather like today, we have in November in the Jordan Valley, this is something we didn't used to, and people are here in Israel are not aware of this phenomena that we need to do something. So this is why we offer to increase cooperation with Jordan on renewable energy. This is what I suggest to try and mitigate. We want to center of climate change in the list in order to see how can regional cooperation in Israel as a water superpower can help. But it's all the key aspect is to have mutual respect and interdependency between the parties. The parties don't want to be dependent on each other. It's not healthy for a relationship. So in order to tackle this problem, we have to create interdependencies and to see how can we help and
I'm going to take the two questions in one go. Nadav said earlier on, you know, you need good governments to create to avoid disaster, and every conflict, really, if you look deep enough nowadays, has an environmental root or a resource management component. So there's no escaping it. You have to address this in a multilateral way. And if you, especially in the current global political climate, to approach it from a point of view where you create interdependency might not actually increase political will. I would maybe approach it from a different way, maybe say win-win solutions. So everybody still feels like they have their absolute independence, but gain something from this. And it's just how you frame it, obviously. Climate change will only increase. Will only I don't know how to say it exactly, but the tensions will rise more and more. I spend part of my time also in California, so I totally understand the sentiments there. And you understand that first it was every other year, and now it's really every year where you have to deal with these kind of things. And it's just you need to look to your neighbors, as Nadav said. You have to be a good neighbor. You have to find each other, cooperate. Maybe in cooperation, but also in facilitating each other. Maybe you don't have to always have a win-win situation. Maybe you can also just understand that you now really have to help each other, because you will not only have to deal with environmental problems, you will have to deal with refugees and knocking at your door because they can't stay in their own area anymore because of droughts, heat, especially in, of course, the Middle East, where it's so vulnerable. So yeah, you have to start somewhere, and start with thinking up win-win solutions, and we'll see what we can do. It's going to be our challenge for the next 100 years.
That's almost like an excellent final word. So let me say our time is unfortunately almost up. So what I would like to do for the last 5 minutes we have is ask each of you for maybe a final reflection or a kind of summary of what you would really like to come across from this web debate, or what for you is the essence of what we discussed today. So for a very brief final word, over to both of you. Let's start again with Nadav, and then Lutin, and then we have a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas and things to consider as we go forward.
I'm sorry, can you repeat, because I have bad connection? Can you repeat the last sentence?
Basically, it's just a question for final thoughts, final reflections to wrap up the debate.
I can also start with key statement if you wish.
I didn't hear the last sentence, but anyway, I understood final reflection. So yeah, so I think it's really unique to take a conflict, you know, an area that is under conflict, and to find ways to cooperate. It's really challenging, and maybe when during a presentation, or it looks like it's very ideal, you know, and it's how come we're not doing it, but when the political conflict is so hard and it has a long history, it's even when it's very obvious that we need to cooperate, it's hard. So we need to start from the really beginning, you know, getting to know each other, bringing people together, and slowly, and start to cooperate on these issues. Though we don't have really time, because today we face major issues, especially on water. So, but we are here to show the government solutions and to offer that. We are an NGO, so we don't have any resources to do the things, with ideas, and I think that we, as a first step, we need, in a conflict area, we need to get to know each other, and the ignorance is our biggest problem, because there is a lot of ignorance between all sides, and there are a lot of ignorance about even on the water issues. You know, when I talk to Palestinians or Jordanians, they think that Israel is stealing their water, and vice versa. You know, so to control ignorance and bringing people together, this is something that we need to start with. And the next step is to think about projects and bring projects on regional cooperation on these issues.
Thank you so much. So over to Lutine for her final words and reflections.
Well, I have to say I learned a lot today. I love the fact that really maybe everything starts with getting to know each other and working on ignorance, because especially nowadays when so much information is available, but it's very difficult to maybe understand which information is correct and which isn't, and you have to really what Nadav said about paradigm shift, where you go from competition to cooperation. That's the key, and I would actually like to add to that also maybe shift from regulation, which is very hard, go to maybe facilitate or to cooperation, find each other in a different way. And I also love the example that Nadav gave of Israel being a water superpower and trying to evolve from being, you know, a hard partner in this area to a basin leader. And I think it starts, and any partnership can thrive if you approach it from a good perspective. And I'm optimistic. I think we can come a long way, and but we have to do it in a very, you know, positive, cooperative manner. So that's that.
Thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience from being on the ground in the Netherlands on the one hand and in Israel on the other hand. It was really helpful in giving a bit of meat to discussing this question. Let me also thank our participants for your questions, for your comments, for joining us today, and for spending this hour with you. With our web debates in diplomacy, we will be back in December, on December 3rd. We're still figuring out the topic, but keep your eyes open and hopefully join us next month again. So let me thank again our two speakers, and bye for now. Thank you.